V6 is a game that means a lot to me. I first played it back in 2012 on my 3DS, and ever since it's had a weirdly lasting impact on me for what it seems to be on the surface. It's a $5 indie game on Steam, initially released in 2010. In 2012, it also released on the 3DS and the Switch in 2017. It's a platformer with a gimmick that's pretty simple on the surface. Instead of jumping, you can flip your character's gravity when you're on the floor or the ceiling. There's a lot more to the gameplay obviously, but this is the central mechanic that everything revolves around. Story-wise, you and your friends, all of whom have a name starting with a V, have a spaceship and it crash lands in some weird, dangerous dimension and you have to go save them all. Not a complex story, but it's more than enough to get the adventure started. You move around with WASD or the arrow keys and the spacebar to flip. Something this game absolutely masters right off the bat is taking simple concepts and making them way more interesting than they seem at first. Even the first few puzzles of the game make really creative use of the flip mechanic, making the game decently challenging but very simple to understand. For example, one of the first hazards you run into is this room here, with these two things moving around. Navigating past them is mostly just a matter of timing your flips with your movement and proceeding forward. Pretty simple. However, only a few minutes later you make it to this room, one of the game's first difficult challenges. To get to the other side of these spikes, you need to enter from the bottom of the room going upwards, which requires you to navigate around these spikes going down, hit the disappearing platform and flip upwards, then navigate all the way back and land on the other side. It shows that just a few spikes on the floor, something that would be easily trounced in any other platforming game, can be turned into a much more creative challenge only possible in this game. As you make your way through the tutorial area of the game, you eventually call up with Violet, who gives you the rundown of what you need to do. In essence, all your friends are scattered around this dimension in separate areas, and the order you want to save them in is up to you, oddly enough putting this game in the open world category. Each different area introduces and works with its own unique gimmicks, but they never feel forced or overdone. Just like with the core gameplay, they're all very simple. The space station area uses moving platforms and conveyor belts. The laboratory uses gravity lines which flip you in the opposite direction when you make contact with them. The tower is, well, a tower, and the warp zone uses rooms that wrap around to make some really creative puzzles. All of these mechanics together make good use of the tried and true method. Introduce the player to a new mechanic in a simple way, and slowly make more and more challenging puzzles with those same mechanics. Most of the game is decently difficult, but there are some really tough optional challenges if you want to get the game's collectible, the shiny trinkets. At first, getting more of them just unlocks more of the game's soundtrack to play whenever you want back in your ship, but they are used for something later, which I'll get to. I won't get into every bit of the game's progression so as to keep at least some of the game new to people who haven't played it yet, but the main concept that I think makes this game as impressive as it is that aforementioned combination of incredibly simple mechanics combined with a gradually increasing difficulty curve for each new mechanic. It makes sure that the only thing holding the player back from completing any one challenge is their own mechanical skill, rather than any kind of confusion. It's the classic easy to learn, hard to master kind of game. On top of the raw gameplay though, there are tons of other things that make the game the great experience that it is. Starting with easily one of the best and most definitive chiptune soundtracks of any game. Magnus Palsson's work in this game is awesome, and even if you don't end up playing the game for yourself, I definitely recommend giving the soundtrack a listen. It's been one of my favorites for nearly a decade. And speaking of other small things, nearly every room in the game that's part of a level has a name down at the bottom. They're a small thing, but I think they add a lot to the game's character, and they were all written by Bennett Foddy. Yes, that Bennett Foddy. Normally by now I'd have covered most of what I want to cover about any given game, discussing the gameplay, soundtrack, characters, story, etc. But there is a lot more content just within the main campaign to play. Over time you unlock a few new game modes. Flip mode is a button that you can press to flip the entire game upside down while still being fully functional. Time trial mode, which lets you play any of the main levels to get the best time you can. No death mode, where you try to complete the game with all checkpoints being disabled. And finally the secret lab, being unlocked after you collect all 20 shiny trinkets, which shows you all the achievements you collected as well as the Super Gravitron, a stupidly hard challenge that I can't last more than 5 seconds in. On the topic of alternative ways to play the game though, the speedrunning scene is something that I'd have to mention for V6. Speedrunning the game itself is pretty easy to learn and really satisfying to improve at, and it's a great place to start speedrunning if you've never done it before. A lot more info about the scene as a whole can be found on the game's speedrun.com page here. Definitely check it out. All of this content surrounding the main campaign is pretty dense in itself, but it only scratches the surface of the amount of content V6 has to offer. At any time in the main menu, you have full access to a list of 17 entirely player-created levels to play. These range from being horribly difficult to being entirely story-based, from a solid 20 minutes to entire campaigns that, for me at least, sometimes last even longer than the main campaign. all with their own trinkets to collect, puzzles to solve, secrets to find, everything. I personally find myself running through most of these once every few months after nearly a decade of playing this game. My personal favorite among the default list of player levels is A New Dimension, made by the game's composer himself. But every level here is pretty special, all created by some really talented community members. If this list isn't enough though, there are hundreds of levels available to download and play created by the community, all available on Distractionware, one of the game's main community hubs. The amount of different things the community pulls off with the level editor is pretty crazy. And speaking of which, the in-game level editor is fully featured and allows you to make almost any custom level you want using the in-game tools. You can make a quick 5-room challenge or a multi-hour adventure with up to 400 different rooms. I even made a huge level myself back in 2016 that you can check out, outdated Undertale references included. If there's any point I want to get across with this video, it's just how much you get for a game that costs less than a full meal at McDonald's for most people. A full main campaign with tons of alternative modes and replayability, endless amounts of levels made by community members, and an entire level maker for you yourself to make any level you want. There's so much raw game here to enjoy from a relatively short indie game that released more than a decade ago. And also there's an elephant.
If I could be somebody else, I would be Terry Kavanaugh, making the games like Don't Look and Be, and everyone play them in awe. The awesomeness of graphics isn't really it, no, the gameplay and story is what makes it fit, and everyone is playing in the evil rooms, but no one ever sad face or glooms, or do they? Yeah, Terry is a monster, I think we all know that. The levels that he did makes you wanna call him twat, and making things the hard way, I really don't like that. The joke's on me, it's silly, I'm feeling like a prat. Anyway, the thing is fun, I think you all agree that if you're waiting for something good, you are waiting for me.